Deja, we've received a formal complaint alleging $9,200 in fraudulent expense submissions under your employee ID, and the company's outside counsel has already been briefed. Harriet Vance did not look up when she said it. She was setting a manila folder on the glass conference table on the 14th floor at 9:06 on a Tuesday morning, and she was wearing blue nitrile gloves, the kind from the break room first aid kit, as if the folder itself required quarantine procedures. The gloves registered first. Not the accusation, not the number. Those nitrile gloves. The way her fingers moved inside them with the care of someone handling evidence. Not a file. I had not slept well. Harriet's assistant had called my cell at 6:45 the previous evening, asking me to come to the office 2 hours before my usual start time. She had not said why. That was procedural. The tone was not. By 9 o'clock, I had already checked my email 50 times, pulled up my expense reports on my personal laptop, and convinced myself it was either a promotion conversation or a termination. Neither of those theories sat quite right. Promotions did not happen at 6:45 at night. Terminations did not happen with that much notice. This was something else. I sat down without being asked. The conference room was cold, the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning running on commercial settings, aggressive, impersonal. The glass table reflected the fluorescent lights from above, and beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see downtown Atlanta spreading out underneath the humidity of early morning. Somewhere in this building, people were already at their desks. Colette was probably already at hers. 3 desks away from mine, waiting. Harriet placed the folder in front of me like she was starting a timer. This is a formal documentation of a complaint filed yesterday, she was saying, and I was still watching her hands move inside those gloves. We have an obligation to investigate all allegations of this magnitude with due care. Outside counsel has already reviewed the preliminary materials. Inside the folder was a printed expense report bearing my name, my employee number, my signature block reproduced on every page. The dates were familiar. 3 separate business trips spanning the last 18 months. Portland in February for the Tech Forum conference. Denver in May for the quarterly client summit. Cincinnati in August for the Westbrook account visit. 1 series of client dinners across the summer. Entertaining prospects from 3 different companies. I knew every one of those trips. I had submitted every receipt myself. I had photographed every receipt the day of the transaction and emailed it to myself as a backup. A habit I had started 3 years ago after a legitimate reimbursement was misplaced in the system, and I had no paper trail to prove it had ever existed. I had learned my lesson that day. Since then, I had been meticulous. The receipts in the folder were not mine. 7 of them had been altered. Some inflated. Some fabricated entirely. Each one precise enough to look plausible to a person glancing at them. The kind of small margins that could pass for rounding errors or honest mistakes. The hotel charge from Cincinnati, $200 printed on this document. My actual visa charge, $148. Then the Westbrook client dinner marked up by 32%. A conference registration fee that did not exist anywhere in my transaction history. Another hotel charge from Denver listed at $189 when my card statement said $151. and someone had forged my signature on every signature block. Stapled to the front of the complaint was a signed letter from Colette Marsh. I picked up the Cincinnati receipt first, August. 3 days at the Renaissance Cincinnati, the Westbrook quarterly planning session. The number printed was 200. I had paid $148 out of my own visa, claimed the reimbursement 2 weeks later, received the funds 14 days after that. The discrepancy was $52. It took me 60 seconds to spot it because the alteration was precise enough to have been believed and sloppy enough to be traced. And I felt something in my chest flatten as I read the number. A physical understanding that arrived before language, before fear, before anything rational could catch up. Someone I worked beside, someone who sat 3 desks away and smiled at me in the kitchen when we both reached for coffee at the same time, had decided I was a threat to something she wanted badly enough to forge documents, and she had apparently asked that the complaint be preserved for evidentiary purposes. Language so theatrical, so obviously borrowed from a television legal drama, that I understood in that moment that Colette believed appearing credible was identical to being credible. That the ceremony of a thing was the thing itself. That if she said it formally enough, no one would look closely at what was actually written. The complaint alleged $9,200 in fraudulent submissions. The annual salary I stood to lose if this stuck was $84,000. The regional sales director position I was competing for, the position we were both competing for, sat exactly 22 days away. The raise attached to that position was $12,000 annually. That promotion had cost me 3.5 years of measurable results. Client testimonials, a portfolio of accounts I had built from zero, late nights on earnings calls, early mornings prepping pitches. The calendar was not negotiable. If Aldridge closed the investigation with a termination, I would be gone before the announcement was even made. That was not coincidence. That was arithmetic. I turned to the Portland receipts. February, the Tech Forum. The hotel was listed at $185. My actual charge, $160. The conference pass was printed at $320. I had paid $240. Every alteration was small enough to seem plausible, large enough to add up. Each one represented a moment where Colette had sat at her laptop, accessed my template, changed the numbers, and printed it all out, apparently believing that if the documents looked official enough, no one would ask questions. Apparently believing that the formality of handling them with first aid kit gloves would make them real. I set the receipt down. I didn't submit these, I said. Harriet looked away from her legal pad. She was 52 years old and had been the vice president of human resources at Aldridge Consulting Group long enough to have heard most of what people say when they are cornered. She expected the next sentence to be an apology, or an explanation, or some version of pleading, some fumbling attempt at reasonableness. I did not offer that. The signature page appears to match your employee records, she said carefully. I didn't submit them, I repeated. And I want to photograph every page of that folder before I say another word. This was not a request, or I was not asking for permission. Harriet paused. Her fingers moved inside the nitrile gloves, a small gesture of surprise or recalibration. She was used to being the authority in this room. She was not used to being told no. She conferred briefly with the HR coordinator beside her, a woman taking notes on a legal pad. A name I did not catch. And then Harriet nodded. And I understood she had just made a decision about me. Some internal recalibration of what I was and what I might do next. "That's acceptable," she said. I photographed all 41 pages on my personal phone, slowly, methodically, every page in order, every number, every signature. The light came from the conference room lamps overhead, even and consistent. My hands did not shake. What I was doing was not panic. It was precision. It was the kind of clarity that arrives when someone hands you the thing they intended to destroy you with and forgets to check whether you might use it differently than they planned. Photograph 41, photograph 42, the cover letter again, just to be certain. Colette's signature at the bottom, bold and confident. The signature of someone who has convinced herself that she is right. What I was thinking about, photographing page 37, was the 6 weeks of self-addressed emails sitting in my personal inbox. Receipts, one from each transaction, photographed the day of, time-stamped automatically by Gmail server at the moment the message hit the Aldridge servers. A habit, a backup, a learned reflex from 3 years ago when the system had failed me, and I had nearly paid twice for the same trip, because my paper receipt had disappeared in the filing system, and my word was not sufficient. I had learned that day that institutional memory does not protect you. So I had built my own. What I was thinking about was that Colette had asked to borrow my expense report template 18 months ago. She said her own formatting kept getting flagged by accounting. And could I send her the one I used? The template that never had any issues. The one that sailed through every reimbursement without a second look. I had sent it to her without hesitation. We were colleagues. We were competing for the same promotion. Yes. And I had known that we were competing, had felt the temperature shift between us after the regional sales director vacancy was announced. But we were also colleagues. And colleagues helped each other with things like template formatting. That was what I had believed colleagues did. That was the person I had been 3 years ago, and 6 weeks ago, and definitely 18 months ago when I sent the file with no thought of what might happen to it. Photograph 41. I took the final photograph and set the phone in my jacket pocket with a clarity of purpose I did not know I had, until I felt it settling in my sternum like weight. Harriet was explaining the suspension now. 14 days of paid administrative leave. Pending the investigation, she was saying. We will notify you of the conclusion within that window. You should not come to the office during this period. You should not discuss this matter with your colleagues. 14 days. 22 days until the promotion decision. 8 days of margin if they cleared me. 8 days to catch up on the work I was not doing. To prove to the people who had doubted me for the last 6 hours that their doubt was unjustified. To demonstrate that I was still the person they had wanted before this folder landed on a conference table. If they did not clear me, I would be gone. My employment would be terminated, my record marked with an allegation of fraud, and Colette would be in that regional sales director position before the announcement even mentioned that the seat had been vacated. The promotion would be hers. The $12,000 raise would be hers. And I would be the person who had been accused. The calendar was not accident. The suspension window was not coincidence. The timeline was designed to make the outcome inevitable, to remove me from the board before the game could be played. Do you have questions? Harriet asked. I had 100 questions. I had 1,000. I had questions about who had reviewed the complaint before this meeting, and whether they had looked at any supporting documentation, and whether anyone had thought to check my actual transaction records before bringing this to me. I had questions about the procedure for clearing my name if the investigation went my way, how long the notification would take, whether it would be in writing, whether it would be distributed to my colleagues, or quietly filed into a folder that would follow me for the rest of my career at Aldridge. I had questions about what happened to my projects while I was on leave, and whether the clients I had been working with would be reassigned or simply abandoned. I had questions about whether I would ever be trusted in this building again. Even if the evidence cleared me. Even if the investigation concluded that I was innocent. Instead, I stood up, collected my security badge and my bag, and thanked her for her time. "I'd recommend not discussing this with your colleagues," Harriet said. "It's a confidential personnel matter." "And of course," I said. I left the conference room and walked to the elevator without looking back. The hallway was already full of people arriving for the day, moving past my face without recognition. The coffee station near the reception desk smelled like burned grounds and artificial vanilla. Someone had left a stack of old industry magazines on the table by the windows. Everything was exactly as it had been 6 hours ago. Nothing was the same. 3 desks away, on the other side of the open floor, Colette was probably already at her phone, watching the clock, wondering whether the meeting with HR had run long enough that I would not return to my desk today, wondering whether the complaint had worked, wondering whether the folder, handled with such theatrical care, had been enough. By 3 o'clock, I was in my car in the parking garage, sitting very still with my hands on the steering wheel. Not shaking, not panicking, calculating. My phone was in my lap. My personal inbox was open. 6 weeks of receipt emails, each one time-stamped and server-side authenticated. Each one sent to an account only I could access. Each one a small photograph of a receipt dated the day I paid it, showing amounts that did not match the numbers now printed in that manila folder. And my mind was already somewhere else, several moves ahead of where Colette thought I was, several calculations ahead of where she believed the conversation would end. The only remaining question was whether she had remembered to stay out of her own construction. Colette Marsh and I were hired on the same day in January 3.5 years ago. We came through the same interview loop, received the same orientation packet, and were assigned to adjacent desks on the 5th floor of the Aldridge Consulting Group office in downtown Atlanta. We were both senior account executives. Same job title, same pay grade, same 401k match. We had the same boss. We performed the same function, managing mid-market client accounts, quarterly planning sessions, execution reporting, and the endless logistical coordination that kept accounts from slipping through the seams between departments. We were, in every institutional sense, interchangeable. What made us different was not visible in the job description. I was hungry in the way people are when they have something to prove. Colette was hungry in the way people are when they have something to protect. I could not have articulated that distinction then. I would have said we were just 2 competent women in the same role, tracking toward the same advancement, supporting each other as women in a workplace where we were still outnumbered 3-1. That was the story I told myself. That was the story we both told each other, at least at first. The first year was actual partnership. Colette would copy me on her best client proposals so I could steal her formatting. I would send her the metrics template I had built to track quarterly performance. We would stand together at the coffee station and trade stories about the clients who made no sense, the budgets that never aligned with reality, the peculiar exhaustion of smiling through another earnings call at 4 p.m. when everyone on the line was running on caffeine and compromise. She had a dry sense of humour about the absurdity of it all, the way the executive team announced a cost-cutting initiative on the same day they ordered new leather chairs for the conference rooms. I liked her. I believed we liked each other in the way colleagues do when they find themselves in the same position at the same company. Both women, both competent, both trying to build something solid. By the end of year 1, we had both hit our numbers. Colette had brought in $12,000 in new business. I had brought in $14,000. The difference was not large enough to register as anything other than normal fluctuation. We both got healthy bonuses. We both got invitations to the leadership retreat. We both assumed we would continue climbing in parallel, the way the institutional ladder promised if you just kept performing, kept hitting your numbers, kept being the person other people could rely on. Year 2 was when the humidity started rising, though neither of us was honest about it yet. The same boss who had overseen both of us was promoted to a regional position, and his replacement, Derek, who had come from another Aldridge office, spent his first month restructuring the account allocation. Some accounts were consolidated, some were shifted, some were given to junior staff who had not yet earned them but could be trained into them. The effect, whether intentional or not, was surgical. Colette got the 3 highest margin accounts. I got 2 mid-tier accounts and 1 that was actively shrinking. Derek explained it as optimization. Colette did not comment. I did not ask questions. I assumed the system was doing what systems do, allocating resources where they would perform best. But the humidity was rising. I could feel it in the way Colette stopped copying me on her proposals. In the way she started taking client dinners alone instead of asking if I wanted to join. In the way she would answer my questions about a shared account procedure with the kind of patience you use on someone who should have figured it out by now. We were still cordial. We still smiled at each other in the kitchen. But the partnership was calcifying into competition, and I was the only one pretending it was not happening. Colette had already moved on to treating me as competition. I was still a half step behind, still believing that good work would be rewarded, still trusting the system more than I trusted my own observations. Year 2 ended with my bringing in $16,000 in new business. Up from 14, a solid gain. Colette brought in $19,000. The gap was narrowing. But now we both knew there was a gap. We both knew we were being measured against each other, whether anyone had said that out loud or not. The holiday party that December was awkward in a way the previous years had not been. We stood in separate clusters. We did not make eye contact across the room. The woman I had thought I was building something with had already moved on to the calculation of what it would cost to eliminate me. Year 3 was when the regional sales director vacancy was announced. 1 position, 2 obvious candidates, the same salary we both made, plus a $12,000 raise, plus a title that would stick to us for the rest of our careers at Aldridge. The job posting went up in January. The decision timeline was vague. Sometime in the summer, we were told, the announcement would be made. That meant 6 months of being measured, being weighed, being compared in every possible metric that could be quantified, and several that could not. It meant 6 months of watching each other work, knowing that only one of us would move forward, and only one of us would be left behind. Colette changed when the vacancy was announced. Or rather, she stopped pretending. The mask of partnership fell away entirely. She took on a client dinner series that required her to wine and dine 3 different prospect companies across 4 months. She landed all 3. She built relationships with a handful of the executive team's direct reports. The kind of relationships that get you invitations to the off-site meetings where actual decisions are made, where people learn what is really valued and what is just procedural noise. She was still professional with me, still technically cordial, but the calculation was visible now. She had decided what this competition required, and she was willing to do it. She was going to beat me, or she was going to remove me from the board. One way or another, she was going to get to that director's chair. I did what I had always done. I worked harder. I brought in $17,000 in Q1, then $18,000 in Q2. I restructured my biggest account to include a new division of their business that no one else had thought to approach. I mentored 2 junior account executives and built a knowledge-sharing system that Derek actually cited in his monthly reports as best practice for the department. I was doing everything right. I was performing at a level I did not know I was capable of. And I was still watching Colette land client after client, build relationship after relationship, move through the office with the certainty of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. It was in late May, 6 weeks before the decision timeline would finally arrive, that Colette asked to borrow my expense report template. We were both at our desks. This was a Wednesday morning, late May, the kind of Atlanta weather where the humidity sits on everything like a physical weight. She rolled her chair back from her desk and looked at me across the 3 feet of space between us. "Hey, Deja," she said. "Can I ask you something?" Her tone was casual. She was doing someone a small favor, not asking someone to hand her a tool. "Of course," I said. "My expense reports keep getting flagged by accounting. The format keeps making them bounce back to me for corrections. And I'm wondering if they're just being picky with the way I'm organizing the receipts, or if there's something actually wrong with my submission process. Your stuff goes through clean every single time. What am I doing different?" I could have told her the answer without the template. I could have walked her through the folder structure, the column headers, the formula I used to calculate per diems. But that would have taken 20 minutes. And she was asking for the template itself. And in that moment, in that very specific moment, I did not think of her as my competitor. I thought of her as someone who was struggling with an administrative process. And I had solved that problem. And why would I not hand her the solution? "I'll email it to you right now," I said. "You're a lifesaver," Colette said. I was not a lifesaver. I was a woman who did not understand that sharing a tool with someone was not the same as building a bridge of trust. I was a woman who believed that technical solutions were neutral, that helping a colleague with a process was just the kind of thing colleagues did. I was a woman who had been taught to be cooperative, and I was about to hand that cooperation to someone who was going to feed it back to me in document form, with my signature forged, with every number changed, with the calm certainty that I would not be able to prove what she had done because the evidence itself would carry her fingerprints. But I did not know that yet. I opened the template file on my computer, the one I had built 3 years ago and refined through every submission since. And I clicked attach and typed her email address and sent it without a second thought. 5 minutes later, she wrote back, "Perfect! This is exactly what I need." It was the last honest thing either of us said to each other. The weeks that followed were the weeks where I should have noticed something was wrong. But I did not. I was too focused on my own work, too deep in my own client relationships, too certain that the institution would see what I had accomplished and reward me accordingly. I was too busy believing in the system to notice that Colette was building a paper trail that would destroy my faith in it forever. She used the template I sent her, but she did not just copy it. She studied it. She understood how it worked, the formula structure that made the numbers automate, the folder hierarchy that flagged submissions as complete, the signature block that authentication systems recognized as valid. And somewhere in those weeks between May and August, she decided that if she could not beat me on merit alone, she could remove me from the competition by making the institution believe I was corrupt. I did not see her at her laptop, altering the numbers. I did not see her embedding falsified receipts into a copy of my template, changing a value here and a category there, making sure every single change was just small enough to seem plausible and just large enough to add up to $9,200. I did not see her printing out the pages with my name on them, my employee number, my signature block created in that template I had handed her, now used to authenticate documents I had never submitted. I did not see her drafting the complaint letter in that careful, formal language that said I had committed fraud and that she was coming forward out of a sense of institutional responsibility. What I saw was my desk, my client files, my calendar full of meetings with people who believed in my competence. What I saw was a woman across 3 feet of space who smiled at me sometimes in the kitchen and who I had agreed to help with a template. What I saw was the regional sales director decision sitting 6 weeks away. Still possible, still achievable, still something I believed was mine to earn. I did not see the knife until it was already in motion, and by then it was too late to know that I had sharpened it myself. I did not look up immediately after picking up the Cincinnati receipt. I held it in my hands for a long moment, reading the number printed there, $200, and understanding in that same moment what it meant. My actual charge was $148. The alteration was not subtle. It was precise. Someone had decided what the theft should look like and had designed it carefully enough that it would pass a casual glance. But I was not glancing. I was reading every number. I set the receipt down on the glass table without returning it to the folder. I just set it in front of me like I was marking a place in a book. Harriet was watching me. So was the HR coordinator whose name I still had not retained. They were both waiting for me to say something, to deny, to defend, to scramble. I did none of those things. Instead, I reached for the next receipt. Portland, February, the Tech Forum. The hotel was listed at $185. My actual charge was $160. $25 inflated. I set it down beside the Cincinnati receipt. Then Denver, May. $189 listed. $151 paid. $38. The conference registration that did not exist. $320 printed on a receipt that bore my signature block but had never emerged from any conference I had attended. The Westbrook client dinner marked up by 32%. Every alteration was methodical. Every number was wrong in exactly the same way. Large enough to be noticeable if someone looked closely. Small enough to seem like a counting error if they did not. I was building a visual map of the complaint on the glass table. Receipt by receipt. Dollar by dollar. The total at the bottom of the folder said $9,200 in fraudulent charges. I was reading through the architecture of how someone had decided to dismantle me. Harriet began to explain something about the timeline of the charges. I held up one hand. Not roughly, not angry. Just a gesture that meant I was not finished. She stopped mid-sentence. The coordinator stopped taking notes. The room became very quiet. I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. A sound like electricity running through wires, powering the infrastructure that was supposed to protect people like me. I could hear the muffled sound of the city outside the windows. 14 floors below. Most of all, I could hear the sound of my own breathing, which was steady, and even because I had learned a long time ago that panic does not protect you. Precision does. I read through every receipt. 7 of them total. Each one reproduced multiple times for what Harriet kept calling audit purposes, as if the repetition made the forgery more real. The folder contained 41 pages. The cover letter. The complaint narrative written in careful, formal language. The signature pages where Colette had signed her name in blue ink, and where someone, presumably Colette, had also reproduced my signature block across every single document. Every receipt was there. Every altered number. Every fabrication printed and labelled and filed away like this was the natural state of my employment record. Someone had been very thorough. Too thorough. Actually, that was the detail I was cataloguing. A genuinely careless employee might forget to sign one receipt, or might use slightly different signatures on different pages, or might have receipts with inconsistent formatting that would immediately suggest fraud to anyone looking. Real corruption has texture to it. It is sloppy, because people are sloppy. This was not sloppy. This was designed, and design leaves traces. I set the last receipt down and looked at Harriet. I want to understand the procedure from here, I said. Walk me through what happens next. What is the investigation timeline? Who reviews the evidence? Do I get to respond in writing? Or is this a conversation? This was the moment where I was supposed to be afraid. This was where I was supposed to ask for a lawyer or break down or try to convince them that I was innocent. I was not doing any of those things. I was asking procedure questions because I had already understood that the outcome of this meeting would not be decided by what I said aloud. It would be decided by what could be documented. And documentation requires evidence that cannot be rewritten after the fact. Harriet explained the administrative leave. 14 days. We will conduct a preliminary review of your transaction records against the submissions. If the evidence supports the allegations, you will be terminated for cause. If the evidence does not support the allegations, you will be cleared and returned to your position. If I'm cleared, I said, will there be a notification to my colleagues? Will this allegation remain on my personnel record? We will issue a closure memo to your manager indicating that the investigation found no evidence of misconduct. A memo, I repeated. Not a question. Just a confirmation of what I had heard. A quiet piece of paper that would arrive in Derek's inbox while I was on suspension. A memo instead of a public statement. A memo instead of restoration. A memo that would tell him I had been cleared, but would not tell him whether anyone had believed I was guilty in the first place. I could feel the arithmetic of this unfolding. 14 days of investigation. A closure memo that would arrive somewhere in that window while I was already gone from the office. The promotion decision on day 22. Even if I was completely exonerated. Even if the evidence proved I was innocent without question. The suspension would have already removed me from visibility. I would have missed 2 weeks of client contact, 2 weeks of being in the same room with the executives who were voting on the director's chair, 2 weeks of Colette being present while I was not. The calendar was not coincidence. The 14 days was not a pause in the process. The 14 days was the punishment, delivered on the front end. Already served. Irreversible. I want to photograph every page of the complaint before I respond to any of it, I said. Harriet did not answer immediately. She looked at the HR coordinator. There was a brief exchange of glances that I could read without difficulty. The kind of wordless communication that happens between people who have worked together long enough to know what the other is calculating. Harriet was weighing whether allowing me to photograph the documents would undermine the investigation or weaken the institution's control of the narrative. The coordinator was waiting to see what Harriet decided. They were both assessing whether I was a threat to their procedure, to their timeline, to their institutional ability to handle this complaint cleanly and quickly without legal complications. "That's not standard," Harriet said. "Then I will not respond to any of these allegations until I have consulted an attorney," I said. "And we can wait for counsel to be retained before we proceed with any investigation." This was a bluff, and also not a bluff. If I called a lawyer immediately, if I invoked my right to counsel, the whole apparatus of this meeting would grind to a halt. The company's outside counsel would get involved. There would be retention agreements and retainer fees, and the institutional machinery would slow down considerably. They could still investigate, but now they would be investigating in the presence of legal representation, which meant everything would be slower, more formal, more expensive. The process would not be clean anymore. It would become a thing that had to be managed rather than resolved. Harriet did not want that. No HR department wants that. "You can photograph the documents," Harriet said. I had won the moment she said yes. Not the investigation, not my job, not the promotion sitting 22 days away, but the moment itself, the power to control what information I had access to and when I could access it, the ability to document the evidence while it was still in front of me, before anyone could decide to alter it later, before anyone could claim it had been something different than what I could prove. I took out my personal phone. I did not ask permission. I simply took it out, opened the camera application, and began photographing the documents page by page. Harriet watched me. The coordinator watched me. I was deliberate about it. I made sure the light was even, coming from the conference room lamps without glare from the windows. I made sure each page was centered in the frame. I made sure the text was sharp and legible. I took each photograph as if I was creating evidence for a court proceeding. Because I understood in that moment that this was exactly what I was doing. Page 1. The cover letter. To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally report suspected expense fraud by Senior Account Executive Deja Whitmore. employee ID number for the period of January through August of this fiscal year. Page 2 through 7. The body of the complaint. The allegations laid out in careful language. Over a period of 18 months, the aforementioned employee has submitted falsified expense reports totaling approximately $9,200 as documented in the attached receipts and substantiating correspondence. Page 8. The signature page. Colette's name in blue ink, the kind of pen that came from the office supply closet. Submitted by Colette M. Marsh, Senior Account Executive, Aldridge Consulting Group. Beneath it, my signature block, reproduced from the template I had sent her, now used to authenticate documents I had never submitted. Page 9 through 36 were the altered receipts, each one reproduced in triplicate, as if repetition would make the forgery more legitimate. The Cincinnati Hotel, the Portland Conference, the Denver Hotel, the Westbrook dinners, the fabricated registration fee, every single receipt that did not match my actual transaction records, every single number that had been methodically changed, every single forgery carefully printed and labelled and filed away like evidence. Page 37. Colette's narrative explanation of how she had discovered the discrepancies. I was reviewing my own expense submissions when I noticed that the formatting of several of Whitmore's reports seemed unusual compared to our department standard. Upon further investigation, I discovered that she had submitted duplicate charges and inflated amounts across multiple transactions. This was a lie constructed carefully enough that it would require documentary evidence to disprove. She had not discovered anything through accident or attention. She had built it. She had used the template I had given her and modified it with precision. And she had then written a complaint that made it sound as if she had stumbled across my fraud through sheer diligence and institutional responsibility. Page 38 through 41 were supporting documentation. Account statements. Colette's email correspondence with the accounting department. A timeline she had prepared showing the pattern of my fraudulent submissions. I photographed every single page, all 41. The light steady throughout, the angles clean, the metadata recording the exact moment I was capturing each image, the timestamp, the phone model, the location, the conditions under which the documentation was being created. When I finished the last page, I set the phone in my lap and looked at Harriet. I have now photographed all of the complaint materials. I said, I am declining to respond to these allegations without attorney representation. I will not be making any statements regarding the contents of these documents. I will not be submitting any written response. I will cooperate with your investigation to the extent that your outside counsel determines is appropriate in the presence of legal counsel. Harriet explained the administrative leave again, as if I had not already understood every element of it. She explained that I would need to return my access badge, that I should not discuss the complaint with my colleagues, that I would be contacted within the 14-day window with a conclusion, that Aldridge took all such matters very seriously and would conduct a thorough investigation. What she did not explain was that I had already won. Not the investigation yet. Not my job, or my promotion, or my reputation, but the evidence, the documentation, the photographs on my personal phone that bore the timestamp of this exact moment. This room, this specific Tuesday morning, when I had understood that the only way forward was to stop trusting the institution to protect me and to start building a record that no one could rewrite. I stood up. I collected my security badge and my bag. I did not thank her. I did not ask the questions I should have asked. All of that could come later, through counsel, through the formal process. Right now, I had what I needed. As I walked to the elevator, I was already thinking 3 moves ahead. 6 weeks of receipt emails sitting in my personal inbox. Each one time-stamped by Gmail servers. Each one predating this complaint by exactly the amount of time it would take someone to modify the documents and print them out. Metadata on the files themselves that would show when they had last been edited and what machine had done the editing. The template that Colette had asked me to send her, the one she had apparently used to build these forgeries, the one that still carried her fingerprints in its embedded file properties. I did not know yet that she had made a critical error. I did not know yet that the documents she had so carefully constructed would contain the evidence of her own guilt, written into the data layer underneath the surface. All I knew, walking out of that conference room on the 14th floor, was that I had the photographs now, I had documentation, I had transformed myself from someone whose word could be questioned into someone who held the receipts. And receipts! I was learning, told a different kind of story than accusations ever could. The administrative leave began on a Thursday. Harriet had said I would be contacted within the 14-day window with a conclusion. 14 days meant 2 weeks at home with my salary being deposited as usual, my health insurance still active, my badge access revoked, and my professional existence placed into a state of suspension that felt less like a pause and more like erasure. The regional sales director decision sat 22 days away. If I was cleared on day 14, I would have 8 days to return to visibility, to catch up on the work I was not doing, to somehow convince the decision makers that my suspension had not already made up their minds. I did not go home immediately. I sat in my car in the parking garage for an hour, looking at my phone. 6 weeks of time-stamped receipt emails in my personal inbox. The photographs I had taken of all 41 pages of the complaint. Each one marked with metadata showing the exact moment the image was captured. My transaction records, which I had already begun downloading and organizing into spreadsheets. I had the evidence now. What I needed was time to understand what it meant and how to build it into something that could not be dismissed. By day 2, I had organized everything into separate folders on my laptop. Original receipts in one, screenshots of my actual transaction records in another, the photographs of the altered documents in a third, and in a separate file. Every single email I had ever sent about expense procedures. Every meeting invitation that mentioned client dinners or travel. Every calendar entry that showed where I had actually been on the dates. The altered receipts claimed I had visited. I was building a timeline. I was building a narrative. I was preparing for a conversation that would happen with someone at some point, and I was going to arrive at that conversation with enough documentation that there would be no room for interpretation or doubt. On day 3, I received a meeting invitation forwarded to my personal email. The Regional Sales Director Pipeline Review, Quarterly Business Development Strategy, Attendance, Derek, 2 regional executives from the division, and Colette Marsh. My name had been replaced with Colette's, but the calendar stub still showed that I had been the one to organize it originally. The meeting notes still referenced my earlier analysis of the pipeline. The attachment still contained a presentation I had built last month, updated with the most recent data from our accounts. everything about that meeting was mine, except the person who would now sit in the room where the decisions were being made, and where my work would be the foundation of the conversation. This was not procedural substitution. This was strategic. Colette was going to walk into a room where my analysis was already sitting on the table, and everyone would assume it was hers. She would sit there and nod and agree with the recommendations I had made, and she would do it in front of the people voting on the director's chair, and I would be at home, building spreadsheets, documenting fraud. The mathematics of the timeline hit me then with a clarity I had not felt before. This was not actually about whether I was guilty. This was about whether I would still exist in the minds of the decision-makers by the time they voted. 14 days of suspension meant I would not be in meetings. I would not be visible. I would not be present in the conversations where Colette would be silently inheriting my work and my credibility and my shot at the position that had cost me 3.5 years to build toward. On day 4, my phone rang at 9 a.m. Valentina. I heard something, she said before I'd even finished saying hello. Valentina Cruz was the closest thing I had to a friend in that office, a fellow senior account executive, someone who had climbed the same mountain and understood exactly how exhausting it was. We had lunch together when we were both angry. We had celebrated each other's wins. She had watched the same slow drift between me and Colette, and had said things like, "She's being weird with you," and "That's not normal," and all the things friends say when they are watching someone treat someone badly. Now, she was calling because she knew I was in crisis, and she wanted to help. "Don't," I said. "You don't even know what I'm going to say." "I know you're calling because you heard something about the complaint. And I know you're calling because you're worried about me. And I need you to hold it. Don't tell me yet." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I could hear the ambient noise of the office behind her, keyboards, people moving around, the sound of normal functionality on a day where my desk was empty and my name was being erased from meetings. "Deja, you should know what people are saying. If it's information you're not supposed to have, I don't want it in my head yet. I'm building a case that needs to be clean, airtight, and if you tell me something secondhand, and I use it later, they're going to say I contaminated the record. They're going to say I heard rumors and built my defense around gossip instead of evidence. I need you to understand that I need you to hold it until I ask you for it. Not now, later." This was harder than it sounded. What I was doing was asking my friend not to help me. I was asking her to sit on information that was probably urgent and important and directly related to whether I was going to survive in this place. But I could not afford to have her testimony as my backup. I needed documents. I needed receipts. I needed metadata. I needed things that could not be reframed or misremembered or explained away in a conference room. "Okay," Valentina said after a moment. "But when you're ready..." "When I'm ready, I'll ask." Thank you for not telling me. What I did not say, or what I only understood after I hung up, was that Valentina had just confirmed something critical. She had heard something, which meant people were already talking, which meant Colette had moved into the phase where she was managing the narrative, telling people that I was going to be let go, getting ahead of the story, so that when the announcement came, everyone would already believe it was inevitable. This was standard protocol. First, you eliminate the person. Then you eliminate the possibility that anyone would question it. I had 8 days of margin, Maybe 9 if I was lucky, maybe less. The rest of the 2 weeks was a clinical exercise in evidence accumulation. I went through every receipt email, every transaction record, every calendar entry. I built a timeline showing exactly where I had been on every single date that Colette claimed I had fraudulently submitted expenses. I cross-referenced my credit card statements, my hotel confirmations, my airline records, my calendar entries, and my email correspondence with clients. I created a visual comparison document showing the original receipts side by side with Colette's altered versions, number by number, marking every single discrepancy. The Cincinnati Hotel, my charge $148, hers printed $200. The Portland Conference, mine $160, hers $185. Denver, mine $151, hers $189. The Westbrook client dinner, mine at actual cost, hers inflated 32%. 7 receipts, 7 different ways she had modified the numbers, 7 opportunities for her work to show its hand. I did not sleep much. I did not check social media or read the news or do any of the things people do when they are not building a legal case. I did not leave the house except to take walks around my neighborhood, where I could think without the sound of anyone else breathing in the same room. I ate mechanically and did not taste the food. I moved through each day with the kind of focus that comes from understanding that everything depends on the next 8 days, and that those 8 days depend on the work I was doing right now, in isolation, on my laptop, with my spreadsheets and my photographs and my timeline. What I did was work. Methodically. Precisely. The same way Colette had worked when she built the complaint. The same discipline, except mine was aimed at survival instead of sabotage. On day 12, I received an email from Aldridge's outside counsel, a formal notification that the investigation was entering its final phase. They had reviewed my transaction records and compared them against the submitted expenses. They would have a preliminary conclusion by day 14. They did not say what the conclusion was. They did not signal which direction they were leaning. But the fact that they were reviewing my transaction records meant they had already done something Harriet had not done in the HR conference room. They had actually looked. They had compared the dates and amounts and details against my actual financial records. And they had done it with the real information instead of just with the altered documents. That was when I understood that there was a possibility, not a probability, but a real possibility, that they might find what I had found, that they might see my transaction records did not match the falsified receipts, that they might trace the altered documents back to their source. And that was when I understood that Colette had made a calculation that did not account for the possibility that anyone would actually investigate carefully. She had built something designed to be believed at surface level, designed to seem credible if you did not look too closely. But she had not designed it to survive actual scrutiny. She had not believed anyone would look at all. She had believed the accusation would be sufficient, that the formality of the process would be enough, that appearing credible was identical to being credible. She was wrong about that, and her mistake was about to become very visible. On day 14, Harriet called and asked me to come in for a final meeting. On day 5 of the administrative leave, I opened my Gmail inbox and searched for receipts. The search returned 73 results spanning back 6 weeks. Each one was an email I had sent to myself, literally me forwarding my own email address, a photograph of a receipt, taken the day of the transaction. Cincinnati Hotel, August 20th at 11:47 a.m. Denver Hotel, May 18th at 8:19 in the morning. Portland Conference, February 9th at 2:32 p.m. The Westbrook Client Dinner Series scattered across June, July, and August. Each one time-stamped by Gmail servers the moment I hit send. 6 weeks! That was the window between when I had emailed myself the original Cincinnati receipt and when Colette had filed the complaint on October 3rd. 6 weeks for her to access my template, modify the documents, print them out, and construct a narrative explaining how she had discovered my fraud. Enough time to decide that I was a threat needing removal and to build the paper trail that would prove it. Except the paper trail was going to prove the opposite. I printed out every receipt email. 73 pages. Then I printed screenshots of my actual Visa and American Express statements, showing the charges on the exact dates listed. Then I opened my calendar and pulled every meeting invitation from those business trips, the ones that showed exactly where I had been and what I had been doing on every single date. Colette claimed I had submitted fraudulent expenses. And then I started building the comparison document. Cincinnati Hotel. Receipt email from August 20th. 11:47 a.m. Timestamp, Gmail server, Eastern Time, permanent record. Amount on my original receipt, $148. Visa statement dated August 21st, $148 charged to the Renaissance Cincinnati. Colette's printed version in the complaint, $200. Discrepancy, $52. I laid that all in one line, side by side, making it impossible to misinterpret. Portland Conference. Receipt email from February 9th, 2:32 p.m. Original receipt amount, $160. Visa statement, $160. Colette's altered version, $185. Discrepancy, $25. Denver Hotel. Receipt email from May 18th, 8:19 a.m. Original, $151. Statement, $151. Colette's version, $189. Discrepancy, $38. The Westbrook Client Dinners, 5 separate transactions across 3 months. My original total, $2,040. Colette's modified total, $2,600. Discrepancy, $560 across 5 dinners, ranging from $20 to $200 per event. The fabricated conference registration. No receipt email, because it had never existed. No Visa statement, because I had never paid it. No calendar entry confirming attendance, because I had never attended, but Colette had printed it anyway, complete with a forged signature block. $320. 7 receipts. $9,200 in claimed fraud. Every single number was wrong. Every single discrepancy was documented, and every single piece of evidence sat in my comparison document with no room for reinterpretation or debate. By day 6, I had printed everything. 340 pages of evidence, organized by date, by account, by transaction type. I had marked every discrepancy in red. I had highlighted every timestamp. I had created a visual architecture so clear that you could hand it to someone with no legal training. and they would understand immediately what had happened and how. And then I understood I needed a lawyer. I found Audra solace through a referral from a woman in my yoga class who had mentioned once that her sister was an employment attorney. Audra worked at Solis and Keene LP, a small firm specializing in workplace discrimination and wrongful termination cases. When I called her office on day 6 afternoon, a receptionist told me she had a cancellation and asked if I could come in that day. I arrived at 3 o'clock with my evidence in a cardboard box. The office was small and very clean, professional without pretension. Audra herself was 29, Latina, with the kind of direct gaze that made clear she did not waste time on pleasantries. She looked at the box. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at the box. "Walk me through what you have," she said. I spent 30 minutes explaining the timeline, the expense report template I had sent to Colette 18 months ago, the 6 weeks of receipt emails in my personal inbox, each one time-stamped by Gmail's servers, the side-by-side comparison showing every number that had been altered. The calendar entries proving exactly where I had been on every date Colette claimed I had submitted fraudulent expenses. The visa statements matching my original receipts to the dollar. By the time I finished, I had spread 340 pages across her office conference table. Audra read through the comparison document slowly. She did not speak while reading. She just moved through the pages methodically, marking things with a pencil, making notes in the margins. When she finished, she set the pages down and looked at me directly. "Stop trying to be reasonable," she said. "Reasonable is a posture. What you're building is a filing cabinet. Keep building the filing cabinet." I did not understand immediately. "I'm trying to be fair. I'm presenting the evidence clearly so they can understand what actually happened." "Fairness is not the objective," Audra said. "Winning is the objective. And winning requires you to stop thinking like someone trying to convince people that you are innocent. You need to think like someone building a case so airtight that the other side has no choice but to surrender." She picked up the Cincinnati receipt comparison, the one showing $148 versus $200, the $52 gap highlighted in red. "This is clear, but it is still defensive. You are presenting this as, here is why I am innocent. What I need you to present is, here is exactly how she did it, and here is the proof." Do you understand the difference? "Not entirely," I said. "One puts you in the position of defending yourself. The other puts her in the position of having to explain herself. You need to make it so obvious what happened that the only remaining question is whether she is going to admit it, or whether we are going to have to prove it against her using her own systems. Right now, you are building a defense. What we need is a case." I sat with this for a moment. What Audra was describing was a fundamental shift from thinking about my own innocence to thinking about Colette's guilt. It was moving from trying to convince someone I was telling the truth to making it impossible for them to believe anything else. It was the difference between being reasonable and being strategic. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Keep building the filing cabinet. You have the original receipts and the altered versions. Now, I need you to find the method. Where did she get access to your template? When exactly? Did she modify it on her own laptop or a company computer? Because every file on a company computer leaves a digital footprint. Every edit is time-stamped. every version is saved automatically. And if she used company infrastructure to build this complaint, that means Aldridge's own systems can prove what she did without either of us having to say a word. This was the moment where the work shifted from being about documenting what Colette had done to being about proving it in a way that no one could deny or reframe. And it was the moment where I understood that reasonable was not going to save me. Strategy would. By day 8, I had retrieved every email exchange between me and Colette about the expense template. The moment she had asked for it, the exact moment I had sent it, her confirmation that she had received it, all of it documented in the email trail, all of it time-stamped, all of it preserved on the company servers, whether she wanted it to be or not. I had also begun pulling my calendar to see if there were any other moments where Colette had asked for something from me that she might have later weaponized. And I found something interesting. Back in March, months before the complaint was filed, there had been a Q3 budget review. I had noticed a $340 discrepancy on the shared client entertainment account. I had flagged it directly to Colette. "Hey, there's a discrepancy here. Is this something accounting miscoded? Or should we look into it?" And Colette had told me it was an accounting error and not to worry about it. But now, with the knowledge I had gained over these past 8 days, I understood something different. That $340 discrepancy was not an accounting error. It was Colette testing whether anyone was watching. And when I had flagged it, and then accepted her explanation without pushing further. When I had decided not to make an issue out of something I could not personally verify, she had learned something critical. I could be trusted to look away. I could be trusted to accept her word and move on. That had been the moment she decided I was safe to destroy. I sent that observation to Audra with a note, and Audra sent back a single line in response. "That's the thread. Pull it." I was learning what building a case actually meant. It was not about being fair or reasonable. It was not about presenting your side of the story and hoping someone would see the truth. It was about understanding your opponent so completely that you could predict exactly what they would do and exactly how they would do it. It was about building a structure so solid that there was nowhere left for them to hide. And most importantly, it was about understanding that Colette had built her own destruction. She had just not realized it yet. Audra made the formal request 3 days after our meeting. She sent it through the proper channels, a letter to Aldridge's outside counsel requesting the digital file properties of all expense documents submitted to HR as part of the investigation. Specifically, she wanted to know what machines had last edited those documents, when the edits had occurred, and what the full edit history showed. The response came back on a Friday afternoon. Is a detailed technical report from Aldridge's IT department, reviewed by outside counsel, confirming what we had suspected. The expense documents that Colette had submitted, the ones bearing my name, my employee number, my signature block, had been last edited on a laptop registered to Colette Marsh. The edits had occurred across multiple sessions spanning the 3 weeks before she filed the complaint. The metadata showed the exact times she had opened the file, for that the specific changes she had made to each number, and the moment she had printed it out for submission to HR. It was not interpretation. It was not circumstantial evidence or reasonable inference. It was a digital fingerprint, a record written into the file properties themselves, showing that Colette had used the template I had given her, modified it on her own company laptop, and printed it out to accuse me of crimes she had committed. But the report contained something else. Something Audra had requested almost as an afterthought. A routine audit of the shared client entertainment account. The one where both Colette and I could submit expenses for client dinners and events. The account that Aldridge audited quarterly as a matter of procedure. What they found was that Colette had been running personal charges through that account for 11 months. The email from Audra arrived the following Monday morning. "Look at the attached spreadsheet," she had written. "This is what they found when they pulled the full client entertainment account history." I opened the spreadsheet at my kitchen table. The morning light was coming through the window behind my laptop, casting a shadow across the screen. I had not slept much over the weekend. I had spent those days waiting for this email, knowing the metadata would show what I needed it to show, but not knowing what else the investigation would uncover. The spreadsheet was organized by date, transaction by transaction. Every charge Colette had run through the client entertainment account across those 11 months. June. $300 for what the description said was team dinner. But the restaurant was a high-end steakhouse in an area where none of our clients were located. July. One charge of $140 at a spa. One for $220 at a furniture store. August. $95 at a wine merchant. September. Multiple charges for what appeared to be personal shopping at retail stores. Each one was marked in the description field with vague language. Client entertainment. Business development. Relationship building. The kind of language that would pass a casual glance but would not survive actual scrutiny. I kept reading. October, November, December, January, February, and there, in the Q3 section, the entry that I had flagged months ago, $340. The description said, Q3 client entertainment account adjustment. The entry I had noticed. The entry I had flagged to Colette directly. The entry she had told me was an accounting error. The entry I had accepted her explanation for and moved on from without pushing further. That had been her testing ground. That had been the moment she learned that I would look away without asking more questions. But that had been where she learned that my politeness was permission. I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet. The total was highlighted in bold type. $14,600. I sat very still. The morning light was still coming through the window. I could hear birds outside, a sound that belonged to a different world. I read the number again. $14,600. That was what Colette had stolen from Aldridge across 11 months, while she was simultaneously building the case that I was the criminal. Not the $9,200 that she had accused me of. Not the inflation. Not the fabrication. Not the forgery. Just the amount she had personally extracted from the company. It took me a long time to move. My chest felt tight, the way it does when you finally understand something you have been trying not to see. The spreadsheet was still open. The total was still there. And I understood something that shifted everything. Colette had not built the complaint because she was afraid I was going to beat her for the promotion. She had built it because she was terrified that someone was going to discover what she had been doing all along. The $9,200 of false accusations against me was not about eliminating competition. It was about creating a distraction so massive that no one would think to look too closely at what she had actually been doing. She had been stealing from the company. And I had caught her once, back in Q3, when I flagged that $340 discrepancy. And instead of confessing, instead of covering her tracks better, instead of stopping, she had decided to try to bury me so completely that the investigation would never get to her. Except she had miscalculated what would happen when someone actually looked at the files, when someone requested the metadata, when someone pulled the full account history. I picked up my phone and called Audra. "You found it?" she said. Not a question. "The 14,600? That's hers." "That's hers," Audra confirmed. "And that is just what they found when they pulled the entertainment account. That does not include whatever else she may have been doing with other accounts." "But it is enough. It is far more than enough." "What do I do with this?" I asked. "Nothing. You do not do anything with this." "I do. I am going to send this to Aldridge's outside counsel, and I am going to make very clear that while their investigation has been focused on your alleged fraud, their own employee has been running $14,600 in documented personal fraud through the company accounts. And I am going to suggest that they might want to expand their investigation before this becomes a much larger problem for them." Audra paused. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I could feel her composure transmitting through the phone. The same composure I had learned to wear. We no longer needed to convince anyone of anything. We had receipts. We had metadata. We had numbers. All we had to do was present them and let them speak for themselves. "Deja, do you understand what just happened?" Audra asked. "She buried herself," I said. "Worse than that. She did not just steal money. She tried to cover it up by accusing you of the exact same thing she was doing. And in the process of building that accusation, she created a paper trail, a digital trail written into the file properties themselves. That proves she did it. She built her own case against herself and handed it to you." I looked at the spreadsheet again. The numbers. The dates. The progression from that $340 test transaction in Q3 to the full-scale theft that followed. The moment she learned I would not push back. The moment she decided to push further. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait, and we prepare. They are going to have to respond to this. They are going to have to address it, and they are going to have to explain how their investigation managed to completely miss the fraud that their own employee was committing while they were investigating you for fraud. Aldridge is going to have a choice to make, and I suspect they are going to make it very quickly." I hung up and sat back at my kitchen table. The spreadsheet was still open. The total was still $14,600, and I understood that I had won. Not the promotion yet. Not the job. Not yet. But the case. The investigation. The truth. Colette had tried to destroy me by building a false accusation so detailed and so documented that she was certain it would be believed. And in doing so, she had created a record of her own guilt, so precise, so impossible to deny, that there was nowhere left for her to hide. She had handed me a map of her crimes written in her own file properties. time-stamped by her own company laptop, calculated to the dollar and spread across months. All I had to do now was wait for them to see it. I returned to Aldridge 14 days after I had left. The conference room on the 14th floor was arranged differently this time. Instead of 3 of us, me, Harriet, and a coordinator, there were 6 people seated around the glass table. Harriet, the HR coordinator, 2 members of Aldridge's outside counsel team, Audra, already settled into the chair beside mine with her portfolio open and her pen ready, and an empty chair where Colette would not be sitting. This was not a conversation anymore. This was a hearing. Harriet opened by explaining the expanded scope of the investigation. During our preliminary review of Ms. Whitmore's transaction records, we identified additional concerns that required further examination. Before we proceed with any conclusion, Ms. Whitmore and her counsel have requested an opportunity to present information relevant to the investigation. We will hear that presentation now. Audra stood without speaking. She placed a folder on the table in front of each person present. Inside were 73 pages, the receipt emails I had sent to myself, printed in order, each one time-stamped by Gmail servers, showing the exact moment I had documented every transaction 6 weeks before the complaint was filed against me. These are email communications sent by my client to her personal email address, Audra said. Ms. Whitmore's standard backup practice. Each email is time-stamped by Gmail servers and contains a photograph of a receipt taken the day the transaction occurred. These communications predate the complaint by 6 weeks. She pulled out the Cincinnati receipt photograph. $148. Clear. Dated. Authentic. Original receipt from August 20th. Now compare it to what was submitted to HR as part of the complaint. One of the outside counsel attorneys had the altered version displayed on his laptop. $200. The discrepancy was immediate. $52. Not an accounting error, or not a rounding mistake. A deliberate change written into the document. Audra went through each receipt methodically. Portland Conference. $160 actually charged. $185 submitted as fraudulent. Denver Hotel. $151 paid. $189 claimed. Westbrook Client Dinners. The fabricated conference registration that had never existed but had been printed and submitted with my signature block forged across it. 7 receipts. 7 alterations. 7 different ways someone had decided the numbers needed to be wrong. Now let's examine how these changes are made, Audra said. She placed the second set of folders on the table. The metadata report. 40 pages of technical documentation from Aldridge's own IT department. Reviewed by outside counsel. The expense documents that purport to show my client's fraudulent submissions were created by modifying a template. Audra explained. That template was provided to the complaint filer by my client in March of this year. When we examined the digital file properties of the documents submitted to HR, we found that they were last edited on a laptop registered to Colette Marsh. The edit history shows multiple sessions across a 3-week period, with precise timestamps showing exactly when each change was made and what was modified. She pulled out the page showing the metadata, the laptop identification number, the dates, the times, every file, every version, Every moment Colette had opened the document and made a change. It was all there, written into the digital DNA of the files themselves. Undeniable and permanent. "This is not circumstantial evidence," Audra said. "This is not an inference. This is the computer that made the edits. This is when it happened. This is what was changed. This is written into the file properties by the system itself." One of the outside counsel attorneys was reading through the metadata report, page by page now, his face very still. Harriet had stopped taking notes. She was just reading. Audra placed the third set of folders on the table. "While investigating the complaint, we identified additional financial activity that requires attention," she said. "Over an 11-month period, the shared client entertainment account shows $14,600 in charges submitted by Colette Marsh that appear to have been personal in nature rather than legitimate business expenses." The spreadsheet appeared on the laptops, month by month, charge by charge. June, $300 at a high-end steakhouse in an area where none of our clients were located. July, $140 at a spa. $220 at a furniture store. August, $95 at a wine merchant. September, multiple charges at retail stores. October through February, the pattern continuing, always with descriptions like client entertainment and relationship building, always vague enough to pass a casual glance. "These charges total $14,600, Audra said. "They were submitted by Colette Marsh using the same account access my client possessed. They span 11 months of activity, and they were submitted during the exact same period in which she was accusing my client of fraudulent expense submission." And then, finally, Audra placed one single piece of paper on the table in front of Harriet. The Q3 discrepancy, $340. I leaned forward and placed my finger on that line. I did not speak immediately. I let the silence sit for a moment. Let everyone in the room understand what they were looking at. "That's where it started," I said. My voice was very calm, very controlled. Short sentences, hard words. She needed to know if anyone was watching. I flagged it to her directly. I asked about the discrepancy. She told me accounting miscoded it. I believed her. That was the last time. I lifted my hand from the paper. After that, she knew. She understood that if she gave me an explanation, I would accept it. She learned that my politeness was permission. She tested me with $340. Saw that I would not push back. And then she escalated to $9,200. Harriet was staring at the $340 as if it contained an answer to something she had been trying to understand since the beginning. The complaint alleges $9,200 in fraudulent submissions by my client. Audra said, "Not during that same 11-month period. Ms. Marsh submitted $14,600 in personal charges through the shared client entertainment account. That means her fraud exceeded my client's alleged fraud by $5,400. And the evidence showing exactly how this was accomplished, the who, the when, the what, is written into the file properties of the documents themselves." One of the outside counsel attorneys closed his laptop. He looked at Harriet. He did not need to speak. The case had already shifted. The story had changed. We were no longer in a room asking whether I was guilty. We were in a room watching someone understand that their investigation had missed the guilt of the person making the accusation. Harriet looked at me. Her expression had changed from the first meeting. There was no more calculation there, no more procedure, just the recognition of something she should have seen. "I need to confer with our legal team," she said. "This hearing is adjourned, pending further consultation with outside counsel." Audra and I stood. We did not shake hands. We did not exchange pleasantries. We simply closed our folders and walked out. As we were leaving the conference room, I heard one of the outside counsel attorneys say something to Harriet. Something I was not supposed to hear. But I did. "We need to contact risk management immediately. And we need to get ahead of this." By the time the elevator reached the lobby, Audra's phone was already buzzing. She looked at the screen and then at me. "They want to settle," she said. "They're calling my office right now. They want you to sign an NDA. They want this to go away before it becomes public." I walked to my car without responding. Now, I already knew what the settlement would offer. I already knew what Aldridge wanted. Silence, confidentiality, the ability to move on as if this had never happened. The question was what I wanted. Within 4 days of the hearing, Aldridge Consulting Group issued a termination notice to Colette Marsh. Gross misconduct. Theft from the company. 0 severance. The paperwork arrived on a Friday afternoon, delivered by HR, with the kind of administrative precision that suggested legal review. By Monday, her desk was gone. The office chair was cleared out. Her passwords were revoked. Her name disappeared from the email system. The office moved on with the particular efficiency of an institution that has decided to forget something. There was no announcement, no explanation, no memo to the department acknowledging what had happened or why a senior account executive had suddenly vanished. Colette's calendar was transferred to Derek. Her projects were distributed among the remaining staff. Her client relationships were reassigned. By Thursday, it was as if she had never worked there at all. The only visible trace of what had occurred was the gap where her desk had been. 3 desks from mine. The absence was obvious if you looked for it, which almost no one did. People had learned not to look too closely at departures. They had learned not to ask questions. They understood, on some level, that asking meant acknowledging that an accusation had nearly been believed, that an institution had almost accepted a lie because the lie had come with paperwork and signatures and the appearance of legitimacy. What surprised me most was how quickly the office adjusted to acting as if I had not spent 2 weeks under investigation for fraud. There were no apologies, no acknowledgement that anything unusual had transpired. Derek stopped by my desk on my first day back and said, "Oh, good to have you back. Your Q3 projects are stacked. Let's catch up this week." That was it. Not a question about the suspension, not a word about the investigation, just the business of moving forward. As if the ground beneath all of us had not shifted. I understood, in that moment, what institutional silence actually sounded like. It was not the silence of people who believed I was guilty. It was the silence of people who understood that acknowledging what had happened meant confronting how close they had come to accepting a fabrication. It meant admitting that their procedures were not neutral, that their processes could be weaponized, that their trust in documentation had almost destroyed someone. It was easier to move on. Silence was cheaper than accountability. 3 weeks later, I was at my desk on a Tuesday morning, the first Tuesday of Q3. The calendar notifications for quarterly expense submissions had started appearing. The cycle was beginning again. The same processes, the same forms, the same institutional machinery that had nearly ended my career. I opened my personal email folder. I created a new subfolder and labeled it Q3 Client Travel. Then I opened my phone camera, pulled up the receipt from a client dinner I'd attended the day before, and took a photograph. The image appeared immediately on my screen. Clear, dated. The metadata embedded by the phone itself showed the exact time of capture. I composed an email to myself, attached the photograph, and hit send. The message arrived in my inbox at 9:37 a.m. on Tuesday. October 1st, Gmail's server timestamp was attached automatically. I sat back and looked at the receipt sitting in its folder, now documented and backed up and time-stamped by systems beyond anyone's control. This was what I did now. This was who I had become, not someone who trusted institutions to protect honest work, not someone who assumed that compliance meant safety, but someone who understood with absolute clarity that documentation was the only language power recognized. That evidence was the only argument that mattered. That being right was not enough. You had to be provable. The irony settled over me like something I would carry forward. Colette's attempt to destroy me through forged documentation had taught me the power of real documentation. Her fraud had created the blueprint for how to survive in a place where trust was a liability and hope was not enough. That afternoon, an email arrived from Harriet Vance's assistant. The subject line was straightforward. Brief conversation about the director timeline. The message was concise. Harriet would like to schedule a brief meeting to discuss the regional sales director role and next steps. Are you available Thursday at 2 p.m? I read it once. Then I read it again. The promotion. The title that had cost me 3.5 years of measurable results and late nights and client relationships built from zero. The $12,000 annual raise. The director's position that was supposed to be mine if I performed at the level the institution demanded. It was all there in a single sentence about a brief conversation. I did not reply immediately. I opened my calendar and blocked the time. Thursday at 2 p.m. Harriet Vance's office. Then I sat back and thought about what I was going to say when I walked into that room. Because I already knew. I had known for weeks, actually, since the moment I understood that I had won not through institutional kindness, but through my own preparation. I had won because I had stopped trusting the institution to protect me and had started building a case that protection could not deny. I had won because I had understood that being reasonable was not a shield. It was a target. I had won because I had built a filing cabinet instead of telling a story. And filing cabinets do not care what anyone believes. They just contain what is true. I looked at the Q3 client travel folder on my phone. The first receipt of the new quarter. The beginning of the new practice. The representation of the contract I had made with myself. Never again would I assume that honest work would be protected by honest processes. Never again would I extend trust past what evidence supported. Never again would I photograph a receipt without immediately emailing it to a backup account with a server timestamp written by systems I could not control and no one could dispute. The file existed. It was safe. It was documented. And so was I. I opened the reply to Harriet's assistant and typed 3 words. Thursday works fine. I hit send without hesitation. I already knew what I was walking into. I already knew what I was going to do. And I already knew that whatever came next, I would have receipts.